Hello, everybody. My name is Patricia Zárate Singletary. I will be leading the webinar today, and we are about to get started.
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Patricia Zárate Singletary y yo voy a estar liderando este seminario virtual hoy. Vamos a empezar.
Welcome to the first webinar of Nuestra Herencia Grant Program Cycle 2. Today, we're going to be doing a program overview.
Hoy vamos a estar haciendo un resumen del programa y vamos a empezar con la interpretación.
Before we get started, we're going to be introduced by our Cinco Rios multilingual interpreter team. Ana, take it away.
Thank you so much. Hola a todos, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Ana y hoy con mi cointérprete Roxana vamos a estar proporcionando interpretación simultánea en inglés y en español de parte de Cinco Ríos Multilingual Initiatives. Hi everybody, good afternoon. My name is Ana and together with my co-interpreter Roxana, we will be providing simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish from Cinco Ríos Multilingual Initiative. Thank you so much for your commitment in creating a multilingual space. Muchísimas gracias por su compromiso en la creación de un espacio multilingüe. To access the interpretation in English, you're going to select the globe in the lower part of your screen with a message about language interpretation. Click on the globe and select the language in which you'd like to participate and listen during this session. If you're joining through your smartphone or tablet, you can click on the three dots on the bottom right of your screen, select language interpretation, choose your language, make sure to click done, and you'll be all set. That is already working, so you can go ahead and try it out. Para acceder a la interpretación en español, por favor elige el globo en la parte inferior de sus pantallas con un mensaje sobre la interpretación de idiomas. Dale clic al globo y elige el idioma en el que te gustaría participar y escuchar durante esta sesión. Si nos acompañas a través de un celular o una tablet, puedes darle clic en los tres puntos en la esquina derecha de la parte baja de tu pantalla. Dale clic en Interpretación de idiomas y selecciona tu idioma. Asegúrate de darle clic en Finalizado y estarás listo. Esto ya está prendido, así que puedes usarlo ya. So, we're going to ask you to please do your part in helping us co-create this bilingual space. Les vamos a pedir, por favor, que nos ayuden a co-crear este espacio bilingüe. If you are bilingual, we encourage you to speak more in the non-dominant language so that we can enjoy the multilingual skill of this group. But if you're not bilingual in English and Spanish, you will have to select the language channel to participate. If you see one of the interpreters raise their hand, it's just a reminder that we're asking the speaker to speak a little bit more slowly. Si no eres bilingüe, si eres bilingüe, queremos que te animes a hablar un poquito más en el idioma no dominante para disfrutar la habilidad multilingüe de este grupo. Si no eres bilingüe en estos dos idiomas, te vamos a pedir de favor que selecciones un canal para que puedas participar hoy. Si tienen cualquier pregunta, mándenos un mensaje en el chat. If you have any questions or any issues, please send us a message in the chat. Thank you. Let's get started. Vamos a empezar.
Wonderful. I'm going to move our interpreter over. And we are good to go. Welcome. To review our meeting etiquette, everything's being spoken in English and Spanish, as we just discussed. The chat feature is available to all participants. And if you have any questions, please use the question and answer feature, which is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or accessed with those three little dots saying more. We will only answer questions posed in the question and answer feature, so please make sure you put them there. Our agenda today, first off, we're going to introduce Latinos and Heritage staff and our organization. We will talk about the Nuestra Herencia Grant Program, how to apply, and how we are here to help you. Question and answers will happen throughout the webinar, but also at the end. First things first, who are we? Well, I am Patricia Zate Singletary. I am the Preservation Grants Manager here at Latinos and Heritage Conservation. I'm going to have my fellow staff introduce themselves on the call, and then we'll talk a little bit more about who we are as a nonprofit. To begin, how about Jen?
Hi, my name is Jen Moran, and I am the Preservation Research Coordinator at Latinos and Heritage Conservation.
Hola, everyone. My name is Karina Malber, and I am the Geospatial Project Manager here at Latinos and Heritage Conservation.
Hola a todas. I'm Seila Mota Casper, Executive Director of Latinos and Heritage Conservation.
So the mission of Latinos and Heritage Conservation is to build a movement that affirms Latinx heritage through education, conservation, and leadership development. We are the leading nonprofit dedicated to preserving Latinx places, stories, and cultural heritage across the United States. I'm going to let Seila talk a little bit more about that since she has been with LHC since the very beginning.
Thank you, Patricia. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to have you here for our second round of our grants program, Nuestra Herencia. This is a very exciting time, but also a critical moment. So we want to recognize that you are here, we are here. We know that there's a really big need, and we're so happy that you found us. For the last decade, Latinos and Heritage Conservation has been working on trying to uplift Latinx voices and histories throughout the United States, and that's through the lens of historic preservation. Our studies over the last decade has shown how underrepresented Latinx heritage is in the preservation movement. And we recognize that because of that, it trickles down and really affects communities on the ground at the grassroots level. So a lot of the work that we've been working on has been very solutions oriented, including this one, which was really founded with the idea that we wanted to give access to communities and give them resources where we knew they weren't receiving resources. This past year, Latinos and Heritage Conservation undertook an equity study. And what we found through that equity study is that there is one grant that Latinos, Latinxes, Hispanic heritage can actually apply for at the federal level previously, and it was called the Underrepresented Communities Grant. So we conducted a study, and we wanted to see out of these dollars from 2014 to last year, how much of this money was actually allocated to go towards Latinx heritage. And strikingly, what we found that was that out of all of the projects, only less than 7% were awarded dollars to help support Latinx preservation. We've known this to be true. We've been studying this for the last few decades. And so this grant program is really to help support you all to do this work. We recognize that there are not enough dollars out there to support the great work, and I'm going to slow down. Gracias. To support the great work that you all are doing. And because of that, we created this grant program and created other programs to help support you in the work that you do. This is our second year, and I know Patricia has been doing an incredible job of leading this. So thank you, Patricia, for all of your work and your vision, and I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Seila. So this is our team. This photo was taken in Tucson, Arizona earlier this month. We are a staff of 9, and we are all fully remote. So it's very exciting to get to connect in person. Our team is Mexican, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Brazilian, Ecuadorian, Guatemalan, and Cuban. As Seila mentioned, LHC has a number of programs that we have created to serve our community. These include the Abuelas Project, the Latinx Preservation Toolkit, and the Endangered Latinx Landmarks Program. All of these are great examples and tools for organizations working to preserve Latinx heritage, and I highly recommend that you take a closer look on our website. Before we continue this presentation, I would like to make a brief note about why LHC uses the term Latinx. Our organization embraced Latinx as a gender-inclusive way to refer to people of Latin American descent. But we understand that Latinx identity is complex and diverse, and people use a wide variety of identifying labels. Whether you use Latino, Latina, Hispanic, Chicano, Tejano, or any other label that identifies your culture and ethnicity, we are here to serve you. You do not need to use Latinx in order to apply to our grant program or to engage with LHC's work. There is space in the grant application to indicate your preferred term. Language is fluid and ever-changing, and we do not pretend to be the ultimate authority on this matter. Thank you for allowing me to speak on that, and we are always welcoming feedback from our community. Now, let's get to what we're all here for, the Nuestra Herencia Grant Program. Woo! This is the nation's first grant program dedicated exclusively to funding Latinx heritage projects. As Selah mentioned with our equity study, we have found that less than 1% of the sites listed on the National Register of Historic Places represent Latinx history. So being able to have a program like this is a huge step forward in our field, and we are so excited to begin the second year of this journey. We have $600,000 in annual funding available, and the program's goal is to empower grassroots, Latinx-focused nonprofit organizations and community groups to protect and celebrate Latinx heritage. And I'm your contact. That is me on the screen. During our inaugural grant cycle, we received 106 applications from 21 states and Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. The image on this slide is the Cycle 1 funding map. Out of 106 applications, we chose 14 grantees from California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Puerto Rico. Here are some photos of our Cycle 1 grantees. Aren't they beautiful? Their projects involve restoring historic structures, creating historic markers for cultural landscapes, developing strategic and business plans for their organizations, designing traveling exhibits on Latinx history, and more. All of the projects that we have funded have to do with Latinx heritage. Heritage is a word that I have been saying a lot, so let's talk a little bit about what it means. The definition of heritage is features belonging to the culture of a particular society, such as traditions, languages, or buildings, that were created in the past and still have historical importance. When it comes to the Latinx community, our heritage is a repository of traditions, values, and cultural practices. It serves as a collective memory. And this grant program was created to fund projects that conserve and preserve our heritage, hence the name Nuestra Herencia. Now, what is historic preservation? LHC defines historic preservation as a diverse discipline committed to recognizing and safeguarding culture and history. Traditionally, it involves protecting historic buildings, public lands, the environment, artifacts, and cultural traditions, significant in our shared history. But at its core, historic preservation honors and sustains elements shaping our cultural identity. It is important to keep both of these definitions in mind as you write your application. There is also a glossary available on our website with other important terms. Before we move on to the eligibility and finer details of the program, let's discuss what LHC's funding goals are with Nuestra Herencia. These funding goals identify our priorities when it comes to evaluating and funding projects. The goals are built into the rubric that we use to score applications. Our goals are as follows: conservation of place-based history through documenting the history of buildings, landmarks, neighborhoods, communities, or cities, along with their significance to Latinx heritage and history. The physical preservation and restoration of places and spaces connected to Latinx heritage and history. Identification of sites throughout the country connected to Latinx heritage and history through historic context surveys, oral histories, and other methods. Nominating Latinx sites to local, state, and national historic registration lists to increase representation. We will actually have a whole webinar on this topic next month. Representations of minoritized histories within the Latinx community, such as Afro-Latino, LGBTQIA+, and Indigenous narratives and perspectives. And finally, increasing the capacity of Latinx preservation nonprofits by supporting organizational capacity building. So if you are wondering if your project is a good fit for this program, these goals are a great place to start. To be eligible for this grant, meaning that you can apply and be considered for funding, the organization you apply on behalf of must be a 501c3 nonprofit and be Latinx-led and/or serve Latinx communities. So a nonprofit can be a community group, a museum, cultural center, historic preservation group, a historical society. But please note that we do not fund local, state, tribal, or federal agencies or schools and school districts. When it comes to the second requirement, you will self-identify if you are Latinx-led or serving in the eligibility form, which is part of the application. You will then be asked for more details on this requirement later on in the application. I'm specifying this to emphasize that this program was designed and intended for Latinx communities. Please do not misrepresent your institution in order to apply. There are two additional elements that we prioritize but do not affect eligibility. First, we prioritize applicants that have an annual operating budget of less than $500,000. This is to help ensure that we are reaching the grassroots community-driven initiatives that this program was designed for. Staff size and other operating parameters, including if you hire a grant writer, will also be considered when evaluating this on the rubric. Second, Nuestra Herencia continues to place a special focus on the Borderlands region, which includes states Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah. You do not have to be in the Borderlands to be eligible to apply. Organizations from anywhere in the United States and Puerto Rico can apply. So while both of these do not affect eligibility, they do affect scoring, as organizations with a smaller budget or those located in the Borderlands will get more points in those categories on the rubric. I will return to that in more detail later in the presentation. Now, if your group does not have 501c3 nonprofit status yet, you can propose a fiscally sponsored project. To do this, you will need to partner with a fiscal sponsor that is a registered 501c3 who will then assume the legal and financial responsibility for the grant, while your group, which will be known and referred to as the project organization, will lead the work and must meet the other eligibility criteria. The application will have questions about both the fiscal sponsor and project organization, but the majority of questions should be answered from the project organization's perspective. A fiscal sponsor does typically require a fee, which is a percentage of the grant award that will go to the sponsor instead of the project organization. You are only eligible to apply with a fiscal sponsor if their fee is less than 10% of the grant award. This is to ensure that the majority of grant funds reach the project org. Before we continue on with the guidelines, I'm going to take a quick break for questions. So please put them in the Q&A if you haven't already, and I'm also going to take a sip of water. $600,000 went out during cycle 1 of the grant program. So that is how much money went to Latino orgs last cycle and will go this year as well. So what happens if a nonprofit is registered as a 501c3 in the States, but also does work abroad? The answer to that is that we can only fund work done in the United States. So if the project you propose takes place in the United States, then it's eligible. We just can't use any of the LHC grant funds to the work that you're doing abroad. Question is, do you recommend other states to apply who are not on the border? My answer is yes. You'll see in the rubric as we get later on, but the Borderlands criteria only awards 5 extra points. So that is not make or break. So I highly recommend you apply even if you are not located in the Borderlands, if this program fits your needs and project. Question is there an opportunity to meet with LHC staff to review the proposed project in advance and ensure it aligns with the funding priorities? There is. So we have these webinars, which are a great resource, but I am available to speak to you one-on-one. This also is a great chance for me to ask that if you have questions over the course of this webinar that deal more specifically with your individual eligibility and if your individual project fits, please save those for an email with me, and I'm happy to answer those and connect with you after the call. I'm going to answer one more question. Does the fiscal sponsorship, like the fiscal sponsor, need to have less than $500,000 for a budget? Reminder that the budget amount is not an eligibility criteria. It's a matter of extra points on the rubric. Further answer is no, because we would judge that one on the project organization. So if you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, I'm going to look at the project organization's budget, not the fiscal sponsor's budget. We're going to keep moving on for now, but I also have my team in the chat who will answer questions as they can. Thank you, everybody. Now that we've discussed what it takes for your organization to be eligible, let's talk about your projects. There are 4 project categories that you can choose from. We have capital projects, project planning, building organizational strength, and community interpretation and engagement. The capital projects category provides funding in the range of $50,000 to $100,000 for the physical preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation of significant Latinx historic and cultural sites. Strong applications will clearly explain the site significance and include comprehensive project planning documents. There is additional eligibility criteria for each project category. For capital projects, this is that the site cannot be a privately owned piece of property that is not serving the public, such as a historic house that is used solely as a private residence. Grant funds cannot be used towards that. A good thing to keep in mind is that your project should really be about making a structure accessible to the public so they can learn from its history. Also, total or complete demolition of a historic building is not eligible under capital projects, nor is new construction. I'm going to use examples from Cycle 1 to share a little bit more about capital projects and the options you have. At the top here, we have Primera Baptist Church, located in Bastrop, Texas. This church was built in 1924, and the only way to access its main space was through 2 different staircases. This meant that people who were baptized in this church, as they age, lose access to the space because they can no longer use the stairs. They applied for grant and were awarded grant funds to build a ramp, so that way the space could remain accessible to an aging congregation. On the bottom left here, we have the Rio Vista Bracero Center, specifically the Quonset hut. This hut was where braceros, who were people coming over from Mexico to work in the United States during World War II, they were sprayed with chemicals in this hut prior to being allowed to work in the country. This is a very important part of the story of this reception center, but due to the need for rehabilitation of the hut, it was only being used as storage. Their grant now allows them to restore the space and use it for interpretation instead. Capital project funding is best suited for organizations who already have a construction and preservation plan and are prepared to implement it. This means that you should already have important documentation, such as architectural and engineering services, necessary permissions, code review, drawings, specifications, and more. Now, if you don't have all that, but you are inspired and want to preserve a building in your area, then project planning might be the category for you. Project planning provides funding in the range of $10,000 to $40,000 for the development of essential planning, technical, and preservation documents needed for successful historic preservation or site identification projects. If you are applying in this category, we do need to see that you have an architect or historic preservation professional as part of your project team. They can be a consultant, a staff member, or a volunteer, but we do need to see that experience represented in your proposal. If you are hiring an architect or a historic preservation professional as a consultant, they can do things like feasibility studies, condition assessments, or even preparing National Register nominations. The grantees we have featured here include the Central American Historical and Ancestral Society of California. They are using the project planning grant to fund research and documentation needed to create Central American heritage markers across Los Angeles. We also have the Tucson League of Mexican American Women, who partnered with the city of South Tucson to do research, oral histories, and talk with community members to find places related to Latinx history that should be preserved in their city. Our third category is building organizational strength. This project category provides funding in the range of $15,000 to $25,000 to help with capacity building in your organization. We want to support you and your staff leveling up in the kind of work that you can do, and this grant can help you hire a consultant that can focus on strengthening operational and managerial skills in areas like board training, fundraising plans, grant writing, and historic preservation best practices. To be eligible for funding in this category, your organization's mission must relate to the preservation of Latinx history and heritage. Arts and culture organizations that are not engaged in preservation or conservation work are not eligible in this category. This is because LHC is dedicated to supporting a national Latinx preservation movement, And we have designed these first three categories to act as stepping stones. This way, organizations who want to build towards executing a bigger preservation project or initiative have a place to start and create a solid foundation that they can grow from. I also want to note that we are a national remote organization. So it is so important for us to be able to support the groups that are on the ground and doing this work in their communities. Our grantees from last year are great examples of this. We have Arizona Barrio Stories from Phoenix, Arizona, the Centro de Conservación y Restauración in Puerto Rico, and the East Austin Conservancy in Austin, Texas. All three of these groups are doing amazing work, and they used grant funds to hire consultants to help them create strategic and business plans, ensuring sustainability and longevity. Our final project category is community interpretation and engagement, which provides funding in the range of $5,000 to $20,000 to support public and community-focused projects that showcase Latinx heritage through educational programs, place-based storytelling, and interpretive experiences designed to foster cultural connection and understanding. To be eligible in this category, your project must be public-facing in nature, meaning it is for your community and audience. This category is not for public arts and general arts programming or cultural events, like theatrical performances, festivals, concerts, or other kinds of arts programming. Intangible heritage is a critical part of preservation, but our funding goals are currently focused on place-based projects. Previous grantees in this category include the Schertz Cibolo Cemetery, located in Texas. They used their grant funds to write and build interpretive signage that tells the story of this small, historic Latino cemetery. Native Bound Unbound in New Mexico used funds to research and document buildings and sites connected to the history of indigenous slavery in the Southwest. And the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute is developing a traveling exhibit on the life of William Peña, a Mexican American architect who designed the Institute of Texan Cultures building that is facing demolition in San Antonio. For this category in particular, it is important to remember our program's emphasis on place-based projects. Our definition of place-based is focusing on the history of a specific physical location, such as a building, landmark, neighborhood, community, or city that holds significance to Latinx heritage and history. This means that if you were to propose an exhibit, it should be connected to a building, landmark, neighborhood, or community. Projects with a more regional or national lens will not be as successful because LHC wants to see the history of specific places identified and shared so that we can work towards the ultimate goal of preserving those sites and their stories. LHC's Abuelas project is really a great example of how a community-focused oral history program can be place-based because it can lead to site identification. If you're asking questions in an oral history about important places in someone's life and the neighborhoods that they grew up in, then that may lead you to learning about a structure or space that has historic significance and can even still be saved or at least commemorated and preserved in our memories. How a person's life and the places that played a big role in it can connect to much larger historical trends, which makes them so important to document. And really, we can't protect something if we don't know it's there. And that's why site identification is so important. To review, The project you apply with must fit into one of these 4 categories. You cannot apply to more than one category. Capital projects, project planning, building organizational strength, and community interpretation and engagement. Before we discuss the application process and grant management details, I will briefly answer a few more questions. Reminder that if you are asking about if your individual project fits with our goals or into one of these categories, please hold those for an email or one-on-one meeting. I'm going to take my sip of water. Thank you all for using the Q&A portion. We have a question that says, if wanting to do a capital project to a building that has historic significance to the Latinx community, does it need to meet the over 50-year-old requirement of the National Register? The answer to this is no. Sayla, would you like to elaborate on why that is?
Absolutely. That's a great question. A lot of people think that their site has to be listed in the National Register or a local designation, like a local landmark. And the fact of the matter is that we know that less than 1% of sites that are designated in the United States are associated with our heritage. So in this aspect, we allow everyone to participate, and that's why we intentionally named it the Nuestra Herencia grants. And then you'll hear us call these places landmarks because if community feels that they're significant, then we believe they're significant. So you do not have to be designated at the local, state, or federal level in order to apply or be eligible for this grant.
Mm-hmm. And that also means that you do not have to meet those standards, such as the 50-year-old requirement to apply for our grant. Just tell us why it's significant and why it matters. We know that recent history has a lot of Latinx representation in it, and we value that just as much.
Yeah, and if I can expand on that, Patricia, in our one of our endangered Latinx landmarks, we actually, it's a different program where we identify threatened and endangered sites. And we listed a site that was built in the 90s, but had a lot of Chicano, Chicanx history. It was a community hub. And in that case, that's a really good example of how community came in and said, this is a historical and cultural landmark. We're not designated, but it matters to our community. And because of that, we allowed them to be eligible for one of our programs. And we use the same lens through this program.
We have a question that says, does mural preservation qualify as capital projects? Yes, it does. Actually, one of our Cycle 1 grantees is all about mural conservation. So while Nuestra Herencia cannot fund the creation of new murals, it can fund restoration and preservation process for historic Latinx Chicano murals. Question is digital archiving eligible specifically to community interpretation and engagement? So digital archives are eligible, but I would note that you need to make sure that they are still place-based. That's the biggest thing that we're focused on here in terms of our funding goals. So Native Bound Unbound, one of our Cycle 1 grantees, is a digital archive and digital repository, but their primary focus was on identifying sites and places. So because the focus of this archive was on finding places, it made a lot of sense in the context of our program. I hope that helps, and please reach out to me one-on-one. We can talk about it more. But keeping that definition of place-based in your mind is going to be the most useful way to engage in this project. Double checking. Okay, that is what I'm going to answer for now. If your questions are not answered, please feel free to email me, and we're going to have another question and answer section as we continue. Thank you. So now that we've reviewed all of the project categories, let's talk dates. The application is now open and available, and it will close on February 13th, 2026 at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Write it down. We will then review these applications from February to May, and we will announce the awards in June. That is also when your projects can begin, otherwise known as a grant period. If your application is chosen and advances to the funding stage, the earliest you will receive funds is June 2026. That marks the beginning of your grant period, which is the time frame when you can use the grant funds and must complete your project. You have to complete your project within the grant period. For projects and categories, project planning, building organizational strength, and community interpretation and engagement, the grant period is 1 year. So from June 1st, 2026 to May 31st, 2027. Those applying under capital projects will be asked to choose in the application between a 1-year or 2-year grant period. If you pick 2 years, then the grant period would be June 1st, 2026 to May 31st, 2028. We've talked about what we will fund, but let's discuss a little more about what this money cannot be used for. I've highlighted a few things from our list of non-allowable expenses, which is just a fancy way of saying that these are things you cannot spend LHC grant funds on. This includes general operating expenses like staff salaries, operational indirect or overhead costs, arts and culture festivals, so such as big community programs with vendors and music and things of that nature. We love them, but we cannot fund them. K through 12 educational programs or commercial property. The full list of non-allowables is available on the Nuestra Herencia webpage in the guidelines under Is My Project Eligible? We reserve the right to make additions to this list as needed. I've given you all the details, so now let me tell you how to apply. First step is you're going to visit our website and you're going to read all of the grant guidelines. I'm sure you all have already done that, right? So from there, you will be able to find our Apply Now button. This button will take you to LHC's submittable homepage, which will show you all of the projects that we are currently taking submissions for. You're going to navigate to the Cycle 2 Nuestra Herencia Grant Program application, either in English or Spanish, and you will click Apply to begin the application process. You will need to make a submittable account before it allows you to proceed. In order to start an application, you will need to input the name of your organization or your employer identification number. Submittable will use this to check that this is a registered nonprofit before allowing you to proceed. So if you are applying with a fiscal sponsor, then you would input their information here. Before you begin your application, you must first complete the eligibility form. This ensures that you meet program eligibility requirements early in the process. That way you won't have completed a whole application only to realize that you weren't eligible in the first place. Once this form is submitted, you will be able to begin your application. This is what the application form looks like on Submittable. A brief little screenshot there. It's tiny, but you get the idea. There are 5 sections: contact information, fiscal sponsor information, project organization information, project proposal, and support materials. You are able to save as you go along in Submittable, but I also recommend utilizing the application template, which has just been shared in the chat. That allows you to work more collaboratively on answering questions with your teams. This template is also available on our website under the How to Apply section. We also have examples of applications that were funded from Cycle 1 on our website for you all to reference. Questions have changed slightly, so please note that, but they still provide a really good example of what we're looking for. Support materials in a grant application refer to additional documents, data, or evidence beyond the main proposal narrative that are used to substantiate your project's need, feasibility, and impact. All applicants are required to provide the following things in the support material section. You must supply a project budget, Form W-9 from the project organization or fiscal sponsor, if applicable, photographs that showcase the area in which your project will happen. So these can be photographs of historic structures, community programs, past exhibits. If you're applying under capital projects, please include pictures of the areas that need rehabilitation. We also ask that if you are planning to hire a consultant or contractor, that you include a request for proposal in your support materials. A request for proposal, or RFP, is a document that invites contractors or consultants to submit proposals for services related to your project. You use these to gather bids for work before selecting the vendor you want to hire. If your project includes using grant funds to hire a consultant or contractor, then you will need to include a copy of your RFP in your support materials. This shows us that you are prepared to recruit the appropriate groups to make your project a success. If you actually already have proposals, that will make your application more competitive. This demonstrates even more readiness and that the numbers you include in your project budget have a source and are less likely to change than if they were an estimate. You are not required to submit proposals, but we do want to see the RFP. Other materials that you can include in the support materials section, also totally optional, include strategic plans, architectural designs, architectural vision boards, and letters of support. While not required, letters of support are very important, and they help to demonstrate community support for your project. I highly suggest asking key collaborators and partners to write one for you. If your project is focused on partnering with another nonprofit or community group, a letter of support could maybe come from a member of their staff. Or if you plan to work with the city or county, maybe a letter from the mayor or a county commissioner would be helpful. Letters don't have to be from people in positions of power, though. They really just need to demonstrate that you have community support and that people can vouch for your ability to accomplish what you propose. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second so I can show us the budget in all of its glory. Thank you all for your patience as I switch around my screens. This is the budget template for the grant application. Cash match, first thing I want to note, cash match is not required for this grant. That's a big deal. If the grant amount is the entirety of what you will spend on the proposed project, then that is all you need to account for in this budget. If you're requesting $50,000, and that's the entirety of what the project's going to cost, then that's all I need to see. But if the grant amount is a portion of a larger budget for the proposed project, then please include details about the remaining expenses and income. If there is a big difference in what you need versus what we can give, then filling out this cost sharing section and showing that you have secured other funds lets us know that the project can be successful. For example, let's say you're requesting $100,000 in a capital project grant, but the work you need done to the building would cost $400,000 in total. In that case, we do want to see the entire project budget and know what your other sources of income are to cover the expenses that fall outside of the $100,000 that we can give. Grant reviewers need to know that there are enough funds to accomplish the project that you propose, and you would input that information in the cost sharing column. As you are filling in this budget, you may customize the titles of the budget categories to fit your project's specific needs. The pre-written categories are just examples. Feel free to remove or replace them with categories that better reflect your project. And you can use the blank rows to add any additional expense types. Now, you may be familiar with a budget narrative, which is a written explanation in a grant application that justifies how the cost was estimated and how it supports the overall project goals. Rather than require that as a whole separate document, we have incorporated it into the budget template as the project budget notes section. You will use this column to explain and justify the how and why of a line item and why it helps meet your project's goals. This is another reason why securing proposals in advance of submitting your application is helpful, because you would be able to name in this notes column that you have a specific reference for the numbers you provide. It's okay if you don't have proposals yet, but please make sure to note if the number you give is an estimate. An emphasis here on the title being Project Budget Notes, not narrative. Short bullet points are completely acceptable. If you need any help with the budget, please reach out to me. Now hold as I once again switch my screen. Question time. Let me look at our Q&A. Please feel free to put more in. Question is, are salaries related directly to the grant project an eligible expense? The grant cannot fund salaries. We can fund the fee for a consultant or a contractor, but salaries themselves as part of a general operating expense, and even if it's related to the project, salaries are tricky. But hiring of consultant, yes.
And Patricia, I want to expand on that because there's been a few questions regarding that. And we are looking for grant funders for different types of funding sources that will allow for staff salaries. This grant that was given to us does not allow for that. We understand it's really important. We are a nonprofit. That's all we do is fundraising for staff salaries and trying to get projects moving forward. So we're on the lookout. It's not to say that we won't get there. And we are hoping that within the next funding season, over the next 3 to 5 years, that we will have a funder that will support salaries.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for telling us how important that is to you. Please continue to tell us that, because that makes a case for us that we can take to funders to say, hey, look at the field. They can't do this work without supporting their staff. We already have that highly represented in our first grant data report from cycle 1. It was a main, what's the word I'm looking for?
A main
conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of our main conclusions from cycle 1 was that we need funding for salaries. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Let's see here. I also have a poll I want to try and launch that is going to ask if you are on the Spanish interpretation channel, because that is useful for our records. Any more questions? Put them in the Q&A, please. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I made that poll very quickly, so I apologize if it doesn't make sense. Hopefully you all can see it. I'm launching now. Okay. I just want to know if you're on the Spanish language channel. Helps us know. Okay, check the questions one more time, then we'll move on. Okay, I'm going to move on for now. We'll come back to questions one more time before the end of the call. Let's talk about the scoring rubric. After you apply, your applications will be reviewed through a competitive process. Reviewers with expertise in the field will evaluate your project based on the scoring rubric we created. This will help them evaluate the project fairly. And I want to note that reviewers will not use AI in the grant application review process. We have 9 sections in our rubric that each have specific application questions that they correspond to. Advancing equity, intentional programming, organization's mission and vision statement, borderland application, significance, urgency, impact, project readiness, and aligns with LHC. In our Basics of Grant Writing webinar, which is next week, we will review the rubric in more detail and talk about the corresponding application questions. Since we are almost at our hour, I'm going to go over a few grant management details. If you are selected to receive funding, you will create a grant agreement with our friends and fiscal sponsor, the Social Impact Fund. This agreement will establish the purpose of the grant and how your funds will be used, along with providing instructions for reporting and financial documentation. This is a fixed price grant, not cost reimbursement. So if your award is $50,000 or under, you will get a full payment at the start of your project. It's something we are very proud to be able to do. If your award is over $50,000, you will get half of the total award amount at the start and the other half after a planned mid-year check-in with LHC. All grantees will have a mid-year check-in regardless of award amount, and this is where you will discuss progress made to date, review the grant project timeline and milestones that have been reached, and provide an update on how grant funds have been spent. At the end of your project, all grantees will send us a final report that explains what you did, what you learned, and how you used the grant funds. You can see the final report and expenditure log on our website, and it's probably linked in our chat already too. Here is the schedule of our upcoming webinars. All of the webinars will be hosted in English with a Spanish interpretation channel available like today. Give it a second so you can take a screenshot. This is also on our website. Something new that we are doing this cycle is that I will be hosting several office hour sessions to help you all as you begin your applications. Registration is required in advance. Questions will be answered in the order that they are received. And please note that these calls are going to be open to the public. So any question that is asked in this setting will be shared with all in attendance. I'm still available to talk via email or to set up a call, but my availability is limited. And these webinars and office hours are designed to provide you with all the information that you need. But there's my email anyway. I will put it in the chat. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to land on this last slide so you can follow us a little bit more. And then I'm going to take questions. But if you have to go, that's totally okay. Thank you all for coming. If you have to leave. I'm stopping the screen share and looking at questions now. One question, will you be sending a copy of the slides to participants? I saw a lot of people ask this, so I take that to mean that you want them. So my answer is yes. We will make the slides available on our website along with the recording. We have a question about County Historic Commission. It says, I'm asking our County Historic Commission to commit to partial fund. They will vote on this in the next month. They will only provide it if we win the grant. Will that add points to our application? I would say that that specifically does not add points, but it does speak to the section on urgency. So that is still something you can include, as information about the context of which you are applying. But it would just speak to an area of the rubric rather than that specifically adding extra points. And feel free to email me too. Question, great question. Who are your partners in making available $600,000? I meant to add this as a slide earlier, my bad. The answer is the Mellon Fund. Sayla, do you want to share anything about that?
I do, and that's a great question. So we are very excited that we have once again partnered with the Mellon Foundation. And we had one first round with them where we were gifted organizational funding to get LHC off the ground from a very scrappy grassroots working board over to talented staff to lead these efforts. And with the second partnership, we have now expanded to create this grant program. So we are now in our second partnership with them. We hope that we'll gain other funders along the way. We're funded through Humanities in Place, which is why this grant program is very place-based and why it has particular restrictions, because funders, as you all know, fund certain things and don't fund other things. So we're very excited that they partnered with us to create the very first Latinx Historic Preservation Grant Program. There was nothing like it in the nation. There's nothing like this grant program in the nation. And so we're very excited to have this as an asset and something to help support you all. But as this fund grows, our eligibility and criteria will grow as well. So stay tuned. Even if you don't qualify right now, just know that we are seeking funding for various other types of preservation projects, like material culture or things outside of being place-based. We know that there is a need and we want to support those needs.
Next question is, for ongoing oral history projects, do they have to be completed at the end of the grant cycle? So this completely depends, on the nature of the project. I would say that in your application, we're going to want to see what your deliverables would be at the end of a grant period. So even if it's a larger oral history project that you're seeking support for, maybe it's that you say you're going to have 5 oral histories done within the end of the grant cycle. So I think as long as you make it clear what your deliverables will be, it's okay if it's an ongoing project. This grant program can support ongoing programming and new projects. It depends on what you apply with, but both are eligible and can be considered. Question is, can we propose several contractors? So yes, so you can supply several proposals in your supporting documents. If you have proposals from 3 different contractors and you include those, that again that helps your readiness score, your feasibility score on the rubric, because it shows that you are prepared and have somebody to choose from. And it's not like we will hold you to a specific contractor. You would just communicate with us who you chose or who you went with. But yes, you can definitely propose several so that you show your options. We have a question about, they say, although our project isn't on the Rio Grande border, does it count that if our project is about borders with, in terms of the railroad line, about how borders and work and migration affects their state in Illinois and Minnesota? So I think that's a really interesting question, and I appreciate you raising it. For the purpose of our rubric, You get those 5 extra borderland points if you are in the states I named, which are on our website. But you could still speak to this. You can still speak to the Borderlands theme in your application, and that could honestly raise points in the mission and values section because we are still focusing on Borderland region, but we know that themes from the Borderlands exist throughout our country and that there's a lot of different ways to interpret what a border is. So you can still speak to that, but for the purpose of the location, you only get those 5 points if you're in the states that I listed. Other questions? Let's see here. We have a question that says, will other financial statements beyond the 990 be required? That is pretty much the only form that I experienced us needing last year through our fiscal sponsor, the Social Impact Fund, who helps us make the grant agreements and manage the grants. They are a wonderful team. Of course, we reserve the right to ask for anything else that we might need, but Form 990 is the primary thing that we're going to be looking for. Okay, I think that we're going to wrap it up. I appreciate everybody's questions. You all have my email. You have the links to everything in the chat. Huge thank you to our interpretation team. Thanks for them. And remember to sign up for future webinars. We'll see you all here next week. Okay. Bye.